He just wanted to look good in the event photo. But when he saw that humble dance teacher from a simple neighborhood on stage, something inside him broke, and nothing was ever the same. Hey everyone! Before we start this amazing story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, okay? And remember to like and subscribe to the channel. The clock read 9:17 p.m. when Ethan Cole walked through the main entrance of the Grand Astoria Hotel in the heart of New York City. The gentle autumn evening breeze went unnoticed by him, as did the architectural beauty of the main hall. Everything there had been meticulously designed to impress. The walls framed by golden columns, the cream marble floor reflecting the warm lights of the imposing chandeliers, and the discreet scent of freshly arranged noble flowers filling the air with silent elegance. But for Ethan, it was all just another obligation in his long schedule of appearances. He wore a tailored navy suit, as impeccable as his reputation in the real estate market. At the helm of one of the largest development firms in the country, he had learned to calculate even emotions. And that night, his presence wasn't out of empathy, but fiscal strategy. 15 minutes, 30 at most, and then I'm out of here, he thought, walking with confident strides and an unshakable expression. It was then that Sarah Jenkins, the event organizer and an old acquaintance from the corporate world, approached with 2 flutes of champagne and a smile that mixed cordiality and calculation. "Ethan, I thought you were only going to grace us with your presence for the last official photo," she said, extending one of the glasses. He accepted with a slight raise of his eyebrow and a rehearsed half-smile. "You know, I never miss a good opportunity to appear as Philanthropist of the Year," he replied with subtle irony. Sarah let out a brief laugh and looked towards the stage. "I'm glad you came. One of the most anticipated performances of the night is about to start. And honestly, I think even you will be surprised." Ethan arched an eyebrow, visibly skeptical. "If it's another off-key children's choir, I'm faking an urgent call." But his voice died when the lights dimmed softly. The silence that followed was almost ceremonial. A beam of blue light cut through the dark hall, soberly illuminating the stage. A group of young people walked up silently, wearing simple clothes, black t-shirts, loose sweatpants, worn-out sneakers. There was something solemn in the way they positioned themselves, as if they were about to deliver something sacred. The music began, an unexpected beat, mixing electronic sounds with a strong, dramatic urban rhythm. And then their bodies began to move. They didn't dance to entertain. They danced as if fighting, as if screaming without a voice. Ethan, still holding his glass, forgot to drink. His gaze was drawn to the center of the stage, where a woman directed the group with an almost hypnotic energy. Her eyes were fixed on her students, but her presence dominated the room like a silent lightning bolt. "Who is she?" he whispered, without taking his eyes off the stage. Sarah smiled, with the satisfaction of someone who plants something and watches it bloom. "Clara Evans, dance teacher, creator of the Future Wings project in the South Bronx. She works with at-risk youth from underprivileged backgrounds." Ethan didn't answer. Inside, a small crack appeared in the armor of indifference he wore. The raw power of that performance, the way the movements told stories of pain and overcoming without a single word. It hit him in a way he couldn't name. He wasn't the type to be impressed by art. He used to say culture was an unproductive luxury, but that night, something inside him began to move, slowly, like a forgotten muscle being awakened after years of dormancy. When the applause filled the hall, Ethan was still silent. The clapping around him seemed distant, muffled, as if he were submerged in another time. The music had stopped, but the image of the woman on stage remained vivid in his mind. There was something disruptive about her, not just in the way she danced, but in her posture, her gaze, the courage not to soften the pain she conveyed. As the guests returned to trivial conversations and rehearsed toasts, Ethan handed his glass to a waiter and headed backstage, something he would never have done at any other event. Sarah tried to intervene with "I can introduce you later," more calmly. But he had already disappeared to the side of the stage, guided by a rare impulse, genuine curiosity. He found Clara leaning against one of the columns in the access corridor to the stage, a water bottle in her hands, her hair now loose, stuck to her neck with sweat. She was talking to two teenagers, smiling and congratulating them on their effort. When she noticed Ethan approaching, her smile faded slightly, not out of hostility, but caution. "Great performance," he said, his voice low as if asking for permission to be there. She nodded politely without extending the conversation. "Thank you. They worked very hard." Ethan noticed she always spoke in the plural, always including the young people. "I'm Ethan Cole," he continued, extending his hand. Clara hesitated for a second, then shook his hand firmly, but without warmth. "Clara Evans, dance teacher." He tried a more informal smile. "And creator of an admirable social project, I'm told." Clara let out a brief sigh before replying, "I'm a teacher, not a potential business partner if that's what you're looking for." The sentence caught him off guard, not because of the content, he was used to direct answers, but because of the tone. She wasn't afraid. There was no awe, no reverence. It was as if he were just another person in the room. "I'm not selling anything. I just wanted to grab a coffee and learn more about your project," he said, genuinely disconcerted. Clara crossed her arms, a half smile on her face. "And why would a man like you be interested in a project like mine? Honestly?" Ethan was silent for a moment. He didn't have a clear answer, just an instinct, the same one that made him change the course of his own business when he felt something was worthwhile. "Because it seems real," he finally replied, "and I'm surrounded by things that aren't." Clara stared at him for a few seconds, like someone assessing the density of a stone before throwing it into a river. "I don't usually give interviews or accept invitations from curious businessmen. Most just want to take a picture with the kids and say they support education." She turned to pick up her backpack from the floor and added calmly, "But if you want to see the project, show up. We have rehearsal tomorrow at 8. Ethan smiled, as if he had received an exclusive invitation. But before he could thank her, she was already walking towards the exit, saying goodbye to the young people. She hadn't left her phone number nor promised anything, just a window, small but open, and that, for him, was enough. The GPS read 7:53 a.m. when Ethan parked his luxury sports car on the corner of a narrow street marked by vibrant graffiti and uneven sidewalks. The South Bronx neighborhood was slowly waking up on that gray morning. The still closed shops, the smell of fresh bread wafting from a local bakery on the corner, and the distant barking of dogs formed a soundtrack completely different from the upscale cafes of Manhattan. Ethan wore a light-colored shirt and linen pants, but he felt out of place, almost ridiculous, as if his clothes screamed that he didn't belong there. For a moment he thought about going back to the car, but then he saw, across the street, Clara sitting on a low wall, a coffee cup in her hand, and a tranquil expression like someone observing the world with patience and respect. She saw him approach and smiled, not like someone greeting a special guest, but like someone recognizing someone who is trying. "You're early. Points for you," she said, handing him a cup of coffee from a thermos. Ethan accepted with a shy nod, suddenly feeling more human with that gesture. They walked together to the project's warehouse space, which looked like an abandoned depot from the outside, but pulsed with life on the inside. The wooden floor creaked under their steps. The walls were covered with worn mirrors and colorful handmade posters. Young people of different ages were warming up in circles, while a portable speaker played a mix of hip-hop and modern Latin beats. It was chaotic, imperfect, and absolutely authentic. Clara moved through the space naturally, greeting each student by name, correcting postures with a light touch on the back or shoulder, encouraging with short phrases and wide smiles. Ethan watched her, as if watching an invisible choreography. Every gesture of hers seemed part of a larger whole. "Did you build this yourself?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Clara nodded simply. "I started with 3 students in the park. Today there are over 100, between street dance, break dance, and hip-hop. But the goal isn't to train dancers." She looked at him, serious, firm. "It's to train citizens who know their bodies have value, who don't need to hide, who can take up space." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. For the first time in a long time, he had nothing to counter. They sat in a corner while the young people rehearsed a sequence. Ethan took a sip of the coffee, stronger than any 5-star coffee shops, but strangely comforting. "You don't want fame, you don't want money, you don't want to impress me. Why do you keep doing this?" he asked, genuinely curious. Clara thought for a moment before answering. "Because I know what it's like to grow up thinking you don't have a place in the world, and no one should dance ashamed of their own body. Here, they learn to exist without apologizing." He nodded slowly, feeling that those words went beyond the project. They touched something in his own structure, something he didn't know he needed to hear. For the first time in a long time, Ethan Cole was not the center of the conversation. And paradoxically, he had never felt so present. 2 days after visiting the warehouse, Ethan sent Clara an invitation. It wasn't dinner on a New York rooftop, nor a formal meeting, but a simple note delivered by a courier in a handmade envelope. "Santa Barbara Dance Festival, California. Talks and performances. Come as you are. No obligations. E." Clara read the message in silence and for a moment hesitated. This seemed like a step off course, but there was something different about this man. He hadn't made promises, nor flaunted figures. He had just listened. Her reply was direct. "I accept, but on one condition: separate rooms, and no ulterior motives." Ethan replied only with a deal and a slight smile at the corner of his lips. He knew this trip would be a turning point, but not in the way he was used to. The hotel in Santa Barbara was surrounded by lush greenery with suspended wooden walkways, the salty smell of the sea in the air, and the constant sound of waves gently crashing on the rocks. Clara arrived at dusk, a backpack on her shoulders and her hair loose, tousled from the journey. She wore light linen pants and a yellow blouse that highlighted her skin tone. Ethan was waiting for her in the lobby, next to a receptionist. When he saw her, his heart, so accustomed to maintaining a steady rhythm in million-dollar meetings, skipped a beat. "Dinner is at 8. Nothing formal? Just a table on the veranda overlooking the sea," he said, almost stumbling over his words. Clara smiled, this time more softly. "As long as there's some good, honest food, you've already won me over." And they laughed. For the first time together, without defenses. That night wasn't about business, nor about dance. It was about comfortable silence, about stories, shared by candlelight, and about gazes that met with less suspicion. Clara spoke about her students with passion, and Ethan listened as if discovering a new language. She told him how dance had saved her life from apathy, from invisibility, and how she tried to give that back to every child who joined the project. He, in turn, confessed that he barely knew how he had gotten there. "Sometimes I think my life is a beautiful building on the outside, but empty on the inside," he said, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the sea. Clara didn't answer. She just lightly touched his hand on the table, as if to say, "I understand." And in that gesture, there was more connection than in many kisses he had ever given. It was on the second night, after a full day of attending dance workshops and walking barefoot on the sand, that the conversation took another turn. They were sitting on the veranda of Clara's bungalow, watching the cloudless sky. The breeze was warm, the silence absolute. Ethan spoke of past relationships, how he had never felt anything real, how everything seemed scripted. Clara remained silent for a few minutes, then turned her gaze to the sea. "I'm a virgin," she said serenely, but with her hands nervously intertwined. "Not for religious reasons, but because I waited to feel it was right, that it was real." Ethan turned his face to her carefully, absorbing the weight of that confession. "Clara, we don't have to do anything. We can just sleep together tonight. No rush. I've never been more certain that the silence of now is worth more than any night I've ever had." She smiled, her eyes welling up, and in that hotel room, two souls slept together for the first time, without rush, without masks, without defenses. The return to New York was silent but full of meaning. Clara carried in her body the memory of an unexpected connection, and in her heart, cautious hope. Ethan, immersed in thought, seemed to see the world through different lenses, as if something in his internal axis had begun to turn in another direction. Back in the corporate routine, he found himself facing a desk piled high with contracts, spreadsheets, and decisions to make. But for the first time in years, those figures seemed opaque. The next morning, while finishing a video conference meeting, Clara surprised him with a visit to the office. She arrived without makeup, her hair in a high bun, and a bag with home-cooked lunch containers she had made. "Real food to remind you what's real," she said, smiling. Ethan, charmed by the gesture, cleared his schedule, and the two had lunch together amidst complicit glances and timid bites. It was as if slowly a new routine was taking shape between them, but the fragile harmony that was beginning to form was abruptly shattered. 2 days later, Clara stopped by the office unannounced, wanting to personally deliver an invitation for a special student performance. The secretary, unaware of her presence, let her into the adjoining meeting room where Ethan was on the phone. Clara stopped at the door when she heard his voice, sharp and objective. "You can authorize the eviction order. We've given them enough time. Those families knew they were occupying private land. Get everything out. Today, if possible." A heavy silence fell. She felt her stomach churn. Ethan hung up and, turning, saw her standing in the doorway, her eyes full of disbelief. "Clara?" he began, but she held up her hand. "You're going to evict families? Children? Is that it?" He tried to justify himself with that cold logic he had used for years. "It's not personal. It's just business. That area is strategic for the expansion of a new commercial center. The city was notified. It's all within the law." Clara took a step back, as if his presence now repulsed her. "You don't see people, Ethan. You see numbers, and the worst part is I believed you. I believed you were changing." He moved forward, distressed, touching her arm. "I'm trying. But she pulled away. "Trying isn't enough when it's about the lives of hundreds of people." And saying that, she left the room without looking back, leaving behind not only the lunch she had prepared, but also a part of what she had begun to feel. In the days that followed, Ethan felt her absence like a physical pain. The unread messages, the silence on his phone, the lack of that strong, clumsy coffee in the morning. He realized he had automatically reverted to his old self, the man who solved problems with expensive pens and official decrees. But now, everything about him felt out of place. The new building he planned to construct on the disputed land no longer excited him, but weighed him down. He remembered Clara's words, spoken weeks before, during a rehearsal. "The difference between building and invading lies in who you choose to listen to." That sentence, uttered casually in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, now resonated like a judgment. And for the first time, Ethan decided to do something he had never done: visit the land in question, not in an armored car, not with a lawyer, but alone, in silence. The 10 o'clock morning sun reflected brightly off the windshield as Ethan parked in a dirt alley on the edge of the South Bronx. There were no security guards, no drivers. He wanted to see everything unfiltered, without distance. He walked slowly through the makeshift entrance to the settlement, a series of shacks made of reclaimed wood, tarps, and stacked concrete blocks. Some children played barefoot among the debris. A woman hung clothes on a makeshift line. The smell of simple food mixed with dust. And the soundtrack was the murmur of voices, barks, old radios playing a mix of hip-hop and Latin music. Ethan swallowed hard. He had never set foot in a place like that. He had always treated settlements as statistics, technical terms, lines in a contract. But now, each of those lives had a face. He was approached by an elderly woman carrying a bag of vegetables and, in her eyes, the typical distrust of someone who has seen too many empty promises. "Are you lost, sir?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly, "I came to see with my own eyes the land they want to take from you." The woman frowned, surprised. "And why? The city already sent papers. Said it's to build a mall." He nodded, a weight in his voice that she felt immediately. "I'm the man behind it." The woman sighed. "Then look well. See if it's worth it." And he pointed to a small shed at the back of the area. Ethan followed her gesture, curious, and as he approached, he heard familiar voices. There, in a space adapted with colorful banners and a smooth cement floor, a group of children danced under the guidance of a volunteer. In the corner, a hand-painted sign, "Future Wings Project Extension, Hope Center." Ethan froze. The same choreographies, the same smiles he had seen on the luxurious stage of the Grand Astoria were now repeated there, between wooden walls, amidst precariousness. A child ran up to him smiling and asked, "Are you new here? Want to dance with us?" He knelt, his eyes welling up. "Not today, champ, but I promise I'll be back." The volunteer recognized him and in silence nodded. There were no accusations, just the mute realization he had seen. Now he could no longer pretend he didn't know. On his way out, Ethan stopped in front of a young mother feeding her child. Beside her, a school backpack with Clara's project. Logo, "My son loves this school. He says he's going to be a dance teacher like Miss Clara," she said, not knowing who she was talking to. "If they take us from here, he'll lose the year. The nearest daycare is a 2-hour walk." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, feeling his chest burn. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about people, about promises that should never be broken. He took out his phone, dialed his lawyer, and said only, "Cancel everything. The eviction, the project, the construction plans. We're going to start over, but this time, listening." And hanging up, he felt for the first time in years that he was making a decision that wasn't profitable, but was right. The news of the eviction cancellation reached the settlement before the end of the afternoon. An employee from the development company personally delivered a letter signed by Ethan Cole, communicating the suspension of any legal action and the intention to open direct dialogue with the community. But this was just the beginning. In the following days, Ethan convened his team and, against all recommendations from his advisors, announced the complete restructuring of the project. Instead of building a commercial center, he proposed to erect a complex of affordable housing with cultural spaces, community workshops, and an official headquarters for Future Wings. He was called crazy, idealistic, naive. But for the first time, he wasn't trying to please anyone. He was trying to transform himself, and above all, to make amends. Finding Clara again was harder than he expected. She didn't answer his calls, didn't reply to messages. He knew words alone weren't enough. So he waited for the day of the students' new performance at the South Bronx Cultural Center. He sat in the back row, alone, in a simple shirt and with anxious eyes. Clara saw him before going on stage but didn't greet him. She danced with the same intensity as always, but her eyes didn't seek him out once. After the performance, while receiving congratulations, she saw Ethan waiting in the background, a folder in his hands. She approached slowly, crossing her arms. "Came to take another photo?" she said coldly. He took a deep breath. "No, I came to show you what I've changed." He opened the folder with the new projects, maps, torn contracts, and a handwritten letter. You taught me what it means to have purpose, and I don't want to go back to who I was." Clara read everything in silence. Her face showed neither relief nor fury, only caution. "You really cancelled it?" He nodded. "And more, I'm putting the Institute at the center of the new plan. I don't want it to be mine. I want it to be ours, or just yours. I just want to do it the right way." She held the papers for a moment, as if they weighed more than they should. "If the project is real, if it truly helps people, maybe we'll participate." She paused, then added, "But I need time. You're still intimidating." Ethan smiled, a mix of pain and hope. "Then I'll wait. But I want to build something with you. Something that lasts, with a foundation." Clara didn't answer, but she didn't return the papers. She put them in her backpack and said goodbye with a nod. It was little, but it was a start. The following months were the most difficult and most transformative of Ethan's life. He personally oversaw each stage of the new project, visited the site weekly, talked with the families, hired engineers who listened to the residents. Real needs. His team resisted, his shareholders complained, but he didn't back down. He began to use words that had never been part of his business vocabulary: dignity, belonging, justice. Clara watched everything from a distance. She didn't participate directly, but she heard the reports, saw photos of the construction, received videos of the students smiling. Until one Saturday morning, she walked unannounced onto the construction site. Ethan was in a sweaty shirt, arguing with a worker about the ideal height of the windows. She stood before him and said, with a smile that mixed surprise and tenderness, "I never imagined a CEO negotiating window size with a resident." He looked up, surprised, and replied, "Closing multi-million-dollar deals never gave me the peace this project does." After that reunion at the construction site, Clara began to visit the project weekly. It wasn't romantic nor sappy. It was something rarer: companionship under construction. With each visit, she brought not only suggestions, but firm demands. "If you want women from the community to feel safe here, you need decent lighting at night. You need spaces with doors that lock from the inside." Ethan listened attentively, took notes, and responded respectfully. There were no more empty promises. There were questions, listening, and above all, presence. Gradually, the residents began to treat him not as a distant investor, but as a partner. And Clara, who still maintained a certain emotional distance, began to see in him not just a man in transformation, but someone willing to face his own shame to deserve a new chance. One afternoon, while helping to organize boxes of workshop materials, Clara let a smile slip as she heard Ethan telling bad jokes to the children in the percussion workshop. He, who previously barely knew his own employees' names, now made an effort to learn each child's name, asked about their families, listened to their stories. "It's strange seeing you here like this. Natural, as if you've always belonged," she said, leaning against the wall. He wiped his paint-stained hands on a dirty cloth and replied, looking into her eyes, "Maybe I never belonged anywhere. Until now." There was silence between them, a sweet, not awkward silence. And in that interval, when eyes speak louder than mouths, Clara felt something in her chest begin to open up again, cautiously, but truthfully. Weeks turned into months. The first wing of the affordable housing was inaugurated. With a simple ceremony, no rehearsed speeches or red ribbons to cut, families entered their new homes with tears in their eyes, and children ran through the hallways painted with murals made by the residents themselves. Clara, from afar, watched everything with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Ethan wasn't center stage. He was in the community kitchen, helping to assemble shelves. At night, they sat in silence on a newly built concrete slab, watching the sky. "Do you know what's hardest for me?" she said, her voice low, "trusting that you won't give up halfway, that this isn't just a phase." Ethan turned to her with a serene gaze. "Clara, I don't have all the answers. But I've discovered that living with purpose is harder than it seems, and much more rewarding, too. I don't want to be who I was anymore." She took his hand gently, slowly intertwining their fingers. "I still need my space. I'm still distrustful. I still have a lot of fears that haven't disappeared." Ethan squeezed her hand firmly, but without urgency. "And I'm still imperfect, but I can be consistent. I can wait for you, and I can walk by your side even when you need to walk ahead." Clara smiled, this time without reservation. It wasn't a magical new beginning. It was a conscious one, of two people who chose not to erase the past, but to build something new on top of it, like the foundations of a house built to last. In the months that followed, the relationship between Ethan and Clara matured like the roots of a strong tree, in silence with patience and depth. They didn't label what they had. There were no official proposals, candlelit dinners, or social media declarations, but there was presence. Ethan learned to respect Clara's silences, and she, in turn, began to trust his consistent gestures. They shared simple meals after long days of community meetings, visited dance classes together, and laughed like teenagers while painting murals with the project's children. He, who once dominated rooms with a commanding voice, now stood out for his listening, and she, who had always been firm, allowed herself moments of vulnerability, like when she cried discreetly upon seeing one of her formerly withdrawn students dance alone in the center of the room with her eyes closed. Clara also flourished. With the new structural support and growing visibility, she expanded Future Wings to other neighborhoods and started a training program for new social educators. Ethan encouraged her, but never tried to control. He understood she needed autonomy to create, to lead. When asked if they were together, she would simply reply, "We're walking together." And Ethan, who used to measure relationships in goals and timelines, learned that walking beside someone could be more valuable than rushing ahead. Sometimes he would watch her in silence as she organized backpacks for the children or adjusted the music for a performance, and he would catch himself smiling unknowingly. It was as if he finally understood that happiness didn't come from what one possessed, but from whom one chose to share the path with. One day, Clara found a folder on Ethan's desk with a sketch for a new project, Future Wings Cultural Residence. It was a center that would unite housing, art, education, and community care. The project wasn't signed by him, but by her. Ethan wanted her to lead the initiative with complete freedom. "You transformed me, Clara," he said when he saw her flipping through the papers. "And I want to keep changing with you." She was moved, but also clear. "I accept the project, but not the role of an inspiring muse. If we're going to do this, it will be together, with our feet on the ground, with purpose, without idolatry." Ethan nodded, smiling. "With you, it's always been on the ground, and that's where I learned to see the sky." It was late one afternoon, sitting on a wooden bench under the shade of a large oak tree planted in the center of the new community square, that Ethan made his most sincere request. There were no jewels, no rings, just a small wooden box made by the project's children with the inscription, "Commitment is built." Inside, a key, symbolic but real. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said, his eyes full of truth. "I'm asking you to build a life with me, with respect, with time, with purpose. Every wall, every step, every window, by your side." Clara took the key, held it firmly between her fingers, and replied, her voice choked with emotion, "It's not a fairy tale, but maybe it's our story, and it deserves to be lived." The sky that night seemed framed for them, a deep blue dotted with shy stars, the distant sound of a breakdance cipher, and the light breeze carrying the scent of food from the community kitchen. Ethan and Clara sat on the newly finished concrete steps of the new cultural center. The yellowish lights softly illuminated their faces. He held her hand as if holding a certainty. And there, under the sky, without, Fanciful promises, they both knew they had arrived together at a place that hadn't existed before them. Did you know that this place, this project, this new version of me, all of this only exists because you were the first person who truly told me no, Ethan whispered. Clara smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. And you were the first person who saw me as a woman, an educator, and a warrior, all at the same time, without trying to mold me, without asking me to be less. They didn't need contracts or ceremonies, but that night they created a pact just for them, a silent pact made of looks and touches, of mutual respect and a desire to build. Clara gently stroked his light beard with her fingertips and said softly, "I'm still going to challenge you a lot, Ethan Cole." He kissed her hand reverently and replied, "And I'll keep learning from every challenge, because every time you question me, I become a better man." The kiss they shared there wasn't their first, but it was the truest, not for its intensity, but for its surrender. It was a kiss from someone who has seen the other's worst and still chose to stay, from someone who understands that loving isn't saving, it's adding. A few weeks later, they officially inaugurated the Future Wings cultural residence. There was no press, no grandiose speeches, just the community, the children, the teachers, and the bricks laid by real hands. Clara entered the new dance studio barefoot, touched the floor with the tips of her toes and said with teary eyes, "This space will shelter lives." Ethan stood at the door watching, "And you will continue to be the light that guides each one of them." She ran to him, hugged him tightly and whispered, "You shine too, Ethan. You've just learned to illuminate without burning." He closed his eyes and silently wished that moment would last forever, because for the first time, it wasn't a dream. It was reality. Life went on with its ups and downs, as it should. There were days of tiredness, arguments, frustrations, but there were also shared coffees at dawn, meetings where they defended each other, and nights when they fell asleep, exhausted but whole. Their story didn't make it into magazines or go viral on social media, but it echoed loudly in the streets of the South Bronx, in the voices of children who now knew how to dance without fear. And in every step, in every choice, in every sincere hug, Ethan and Clara wrote the kind of story the world needs to see more of. The story of a love that transforms, that builds, that doesn't need to be perfect, just true. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content. See you later.